Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our head-to-head series where myself and a guest go head-to-head, toe-to-toe, whatever we want to do, and discuss our favorite recordings of a famous Beethoven symphony. And tonight's symphony is the enormous Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and our guest is conductor Judith Yan. Judith, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, welcome to this chat. First of all, how are you doing, and where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Guelph, Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm fine. I really should be in Australia right now, finishing a run of Sleeping Beauty, but
Okay.
alas, I'm here.
Okay. So you've had some unexpected time off for these few months.
Exactly.
Yeah. And where in Australia would you have been?
Would have been in Perth, which is on the west coast, with the
Mm-hmm.
West Sydney Orchestra, the West
Nice.
Australian Ballet. Yeah.
Nice. And so you said you're in Guelph, Ontario, and that's your home base. I take it.
Yeah. Yes, that's where
Great.
the house is. Yeah, we love it here. Yeah.
Nice. So it's that nice distance outside of Toronto, about an hour or so, but
Yeah,
you're still close to everything, but far enough
right.
away so that you can relax and away from the hustle and bustle.
Exactly. It's on a good day, if you take 407, it's 40-ish minutes to Pearson
Wow.
International. So
Yeah.
what more could you
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Good old 407, the toll road
ask?
that gets you places fast.
Exactly.
Nice. So now we are going to have you as a guest conductor this next year, this next season, and looking forward to that. But also, we're here to discuss some Beethoven. Have you conducted a lot of Beethoven?
Um, uh, yes, I guess so. I've done Beethoven Ninth. Uh, I'm trying to think, in the last couple of years, number five, number three.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, great respect.
Yeah, and what's your experience with Beethoven 9? Because we're discussing tonight, and it's his longest symphony, and it's most unusual, especially for the time. How did you enjoy it? What was your experience with it?
Um, yeah, it's yes, very much so. But it's terrifying. Because it's such a incredible work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to you feel a certain amount of responsibility.
Yeah,
And yeah, but it's
that's the understatement. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And there's
And yeah. Mhm.
and there's so many elements, right?
Oh, absolutely. You got, the choir, and you got your soloists, and then, when you get to that final move, and I'll mention, like, you get so caught up in not only the text, but the meaning and the history. It's
Mm-hmm.
a very, very, uh, very emotional experience.
It is. You're so right, and it's funny because most people know the last movement, or at least the theme from the last
Yes.
movement.
Mhm.
But when you finally arrive at the last movement, you've already done three enormous and extraordinary movements, and
Absolutely.
all
Yeah.
masterpieces in their own way. And
Yes.
so to you've already done so much by the time you even look at the choir, let alone
Oh,
have them sing. Yeah.
uh, exactly. And there's so many. Oh, I mean, there's so many choices of tempo, that you could take, and it's interesting that we're going to discuss the different recordings, because everybody has a different take on how each section should be.
That's right.
And I really think that it just like any kind of art, it's really has to do with the history of where you are right now.
Right.
You know,
That's
what's happening at the moment.
That's a great point. Context is everything, and especially with a piece like this, like you mentioned, Alimention and the text.
Yeah.
It's a Goethe, originally a Goethe drinking song,
Yeah.
but with Beethoven writing his little blurb at the beginning
Yeah.
for the bass to sing, and then the men in the choir, or at least the basses and the tenors.
Yeah.
Um, you're right. There's such humanity there that
Yeah.
it's used in special occasions, at special
Yeah.
times, and has
Yeah.
meanings. And I love
Yes.
that we're going to discuss one
Yeah.
a recording that kind of sums this up, what we're going to
Oh
discuss.
my. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
let's
Oh,
let's get into it.
all right. Got it.
So, what's your first recording that you want to discuss?
I think it has to be the 1942. I think there were two very important live recordings that Furtwängler did in 1942. The first one was in March, I think 22nd maybe, and then the second one was in April.
Mm-hmm.
And the one in March, I think the one in April was not released until very, very much later. It was some sort of bootleg, because
Yes.
we had the radio announcements in the beginning and the end, and I have yet to hear one that doesn't have the in
Right.
the background. And that particular one is significant because Furtwängler was tricked into conducting that on the eve of Hitler's birthday, and so I can just imagine like what it must have been like what he must have felt like, standing back there, waiting for the stage match, and go,
Mm-hmm.
walking out. Like, what is that like? He didn't want to do it. He had a friend or try to write two doctors' note to excuse him from doing this concert.
Right.
And I think that's why these two live recordings, and certainly the one in March as well, these thoughts of what was going on in the world, in Germany, and the fact that he didn't support the regime in the slightest, the fact that the regimes threatened half of his the Berlin Philharmonic, half of his colleagues. I can only imagine how the musicians, the singers, the choir, like how they must be feeling. Like,
Yeah.
what if you don't do the tempo that makes the people in the audience happy? Like, he was threatened with incarceration, and so I can't even imagine. So,
Yeah, and we talked about context before, and you summed it up beautifully of what was happening and the right tempo. I mean, for the audience, but one in particular, and
yeah,
and the the dilemma that Furtwängler was such a interesting character because he was not for the regime, but he was
right,
naive enough to think that he could stay there and make a difference. A lot of his
exactly,
colleagues fled, of course, in the late
yeah,
30s, and
mhm,
Furtwängler himself wasn't Jewish, but he tried to support as many Jewish musicians as he
yes,
could. But at the same time, by 42, almost all the Jewish musicians were gone from the orchestra,
yeah,
and there were
yeah,
members of the orchestra that did
yeah,
support the regime. And so it
yeah,
was this conflicted time, and
yeah,
Furtwängler, after the war,
yeah,
tried to explain what he was doing. But this is 1942, so there's still 3 years to go. He's probably thinking,
right,
I can make a difference, even if I'm
yeah,
forced into do something. And
absolutely,
and also we have this great Beethoven work, which was all about
oh,
humanity, and then
yeah,
his conflicting, I'm sure, Furtwängler's
mhm,
conflicting ideas of
yep,
here we are. We're trying.
yeah,
This is a work about humanity, all of humanity,
I know
but we're in this
exactly,
regime. What's going on? Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and you can hear that tension in the recording. It's
Oh,
extraordinary.
completely. Because when you listen to some of the other recordings that even he did, and or some other of his colleagues did, particularly in the end, the timpani, it's like so loud, and I love it. Like it practically obliterated the brass and the woodwinds and the strings. Like it just sounded like it must have sounded like bombs
Yeah.
falling.
Yes.
And I am sitting here listening, going, "Oh my goodness!" Like the fear and anxiety that each of these musicians must have felt.
Right.
And I'll,
And you know that feeling as conductor when you can have a lot of emotions beforehand, after,
yeah,
but during,
mhm,
sometimes it comes out in different ways that you don't expect. And sometimes there's just a hard drive or something that you're just,
yeah,
let's go.
yeah,
And sometimes it's
yeah,
reflective, all of this, but you
yep,
don't really
yeah.
know until you're in the moment.
That
Uh,
is so true.
right? And so,
Yeah, yeah,
and Furtwängler was, so for those of you who don't know, he had this famous thing where he'd shake his hands when he'd give a downbeat. So no one really knew where the downbeat
Right.
came. He did not have a nervous disorder. It was his intention to not be so clear, so that people had to listen, and there was this misterioso aura to
Yes,
him.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
so in this recording, it kind of starts that way, but there's a drive that is intense, and I'm
Gosh.
imagining there must be a part of him that just is fighting something, but I'm not sure what. I mean, we can only project. We don't really know,
Yeah,
but it sounds
exactly.
that way.
Exactly. Like there was one moment in I think is it in the first movement, or oh no, it's in the second movement, where if you hear some of the other recordings, right, they of other interpretations of different other times in
Hmm.
history, it's like elegant, or is self-assured. But in this particular recording, it's pure desperation, right? It's
Yeah.
incredible. And there's that in second movement there, I think there, just before rehearsal A, there is a repeat, right? A repeat, or after, or something like leading up to rehearsal A. The first time he does it, he drives the tempo for about 4 measures, right? 4 measures before you get to rehearsal A, and then and then you have to go back to the beginning and repeat. And then the second time, he drives the tempo 16 measures before rehearsal A. Like nobody does that, right?
No.
I mean,
No.
nobody, because you just keep the tempo, pure and very exact, right?
Right.
Because right, but that's why I think I love live recordings, because I think this, in essence, it is what we do, right? We do live performances because if and there's nothing, and I love studio recordings as well,
Yeah.
but there's something incredible about not being able to fix anything,
Right.
that it just is what is happening at the time. You can't do it over and over again to your sound engineer's
No.
happy. You can't, and yeah, it's like if you were to record your favorite dinner conversation, right?
Right.
Play it over and over again. Why would
Right.
you do that?
And it goes, and it will go in directions that you didn't even expect. And
Yeah,
we've all had the experience where we listen back on recordings, go, oh my goodness, I wish I wouldn't have sped up there or done this. But it's the moment,
yeah, exactly.
and for that moment, it might work, and it's not
Yeah,
even. It might. A lot of the times, it's not intentional. It's just what's
yeah,
driving something, and it's not just us; it's the musicians, and we're all like, this thing
yeah,
together, which is pretty
yeah.
special. Yeah,
I completely agree.
yeah,
And it is not just us, but it's the audience, right? I mean, sometimes, you got your back, we got our backs to the audience, but we can feel like it's almost like you have eyes here. You know the vibe of the audience of
yes,
the night. Right?
yes, yes.
And in the case of with when I've gone to Australia, it's always like these 15 performance runs, right? Like, and every day, every night is something different. You feel it. By then, the musicians, somebody, yeah, had an issue with their car coming in, and you can see somebody just had a birthday, or somebody's son just graduated, and all these things contribute to what's happening in that evening. And
Hmm.
of course, like the first two performances, you're like so zoned in, right? Because you're terrified. By the time you get to the 10th performance, the places where you can relax and go,
Right.
oh, I think I need a dozen eggs. Oh yeah, dozen eggs, about three. Yeah, a couple of tomatoes. And now I'm back in the room, right? Because now you
That's
got to pay
right.
attention.
Yeah.
You can't get that in a recording.
No. No.
I mean,
No.
in a studio recording. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I like I said, we can't know for sure, but I think that atmosphere must have lent itself to what we hear on that recording. Just
Oh,
to be in that room at that time with those people, just extraordinary.
oh my!
Yeah,
Can you imagine?
yeah.
Like and even like the 1942, the one that the bootleg one.
Mm-hmm.
The last 10 seconds are the most terrifying things I've ever heard. Like, it was like this absolute, utter, out of control scream
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of death. Yeah, anyway, it's not perfect recording, but it's like being there.
Right. Right. Exactly. So let's go to the other extreme, or to
Yeah.
something completely different. And spoiler alert: this is one. This happened. This happened actually for the last 2 weeks, and it happened today. Um, Judith and I did talk on the phone just to see, what recordings we had. But the two recordings that she chose, I was going to choose the 1942 Furtwängler recording, and also this one, which I've mentioned before. But tell me about your next recording.
Okay, next one is the Harnoncourt.
Harnoncourt, yeah.
Absolutely stunning, perfect, perfect recording. I should give more detail. Is the orchestra, the Chamber Orchestra of Europe, isn't it? 1991.
Yeah.
Okay. I love this recording because when I hear it, I think, oh my goodness, that's exactly how I should play every instrument. So it's right. What do you think?
Well, you're right. I mentioned this last week. The Chamber Orchestra of Europe is made up of the principals, the top players of the top European orchestras. So, you've got a principal bassoon from the Berlin Phil. You've got some violin from the Bavarian Radio Orchestra, others from the Concertgebouw, from whatever orchestras they are, and also North Americans as well will play in this orchestra. And they don't have a home base. So the musicians themselves choose what conductors they want to work with, and then they get together kind of residencies. So they'll do something. For instance, this one was to record the Beethoven symphonies, but also tour them. And Harnoncourt, I mentioned last week, and Judith, that he was a pioneer in the early music development of sound and how to play different things in a different way than was played before. And so Harnoncourt has that beautiful essence of trying new things, but like I said before, never dogmatic. He was always very inquisitive and curious.
Yes.
And I think you hear that, right, in the recordings?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a not, I mean, I'm listening to the string playing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Oh.
Yeah. And if you read the liner notes of those players, and you and then go to the websites in the early 90s of the orchestras, and they just all line up of all the top orchestras, and it's a super group. It's this band that love to get together and have a great time. They're still around, of course, today, and recording with great people and great soloists. And I also find with Harnoncourt, so the whole early music thing, there are different conductors that do different things. They're not, of course, all the same. They're not all doing the exact same tempo, even though they usually are more adherent to what Beethoven wanted. But my example of an early music group that kind of jumps on the horse and you do not let go until that final note is Roger Norrington. And so Norrington and Harnoncourt, Norrington's a bit younger, and but Norrington is known. He's a British early music specialist, but also conducts modern groups as well. He was with Stuttgart for many years, but he was kind of a pioneer in terms of incredible playing. So the beginning of the early music movement, some of the playing wasn't that great because we had to kind of learn another instrument like oboes and different things.
Right.
But Norrington was, come hell or high water, he was going and he was going to make it great. And he was not going to give in to anything. Do you know these recordings at all, Judith?
You know what? I don't know that recording.
Okay.
Those recordings, I have to listen to them.
Okay. And actually, you can't see it, Judith, but I have the wrong the wrong cover. It says Beethoven's 4 and 5. Sorry about that. There should be a 9 up there, but it's the same EMI recording thing. But that's when you're conducting, especially Baroque, classical, and early Romantic repertoire like Beethoven, do you get into the whole early music world?
I greatly admire that whole movement. I think it's incredibly valid. As a matter of fact, I admire it so much that I don't dare venture to do it. In that way, though I do, look and I do listen,
Mm-hmm.
and and ask a lot of questions. But there is a part of me that feels that it's so specialized, as you say. It's like learning another instrument. I would have
Mm-hmm.
to learn a separate set of years, and I don't know if it's because of my background of doing just as much pit work as I do symphonic stuff. It was like, one third of everything. It just sort of kind of informs how I, view sometimes symphonic music.
Right.
Um, it could be all the opera background too. That's,
Sure.
too. When I'm doing something or I'm listening to something, I want to see the picture. I want somebody to take me on a trip. And yeah, so
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
you're right. It's a different language, but I think because it's been around for so long, since the early
Yes.
'70s, that
Hmm.
most conductors nowadays and players
Yeah.
have been influenced by it. And so even if you go to, let's say, a performance of Beethoven 9,
Hmm.
and it's a what we call a modern orchestra, like the Saskatoon
Hmm.
Symphony,
Hmm.
like the
Yeah.
New York
Yeah.
Phil, or any of these other
Mhm.
orchestras. They are able to adjust
Yes.
and make changes in accordance to
Yeah.
someone who wants to do a bit more historically
Right.
informed. And
Yeah.
not that the modern way, or the we wouldn't even call it modern anymore, because I think the
Yeah.
mix has really happened with so many of these great
Yes.
conductors and players
Yeah.
that you will hear the great orchestras of
Yeah.
the world. Berlin. I mean, the principals of
Mhm.
Berlin have their own Baroque orchestra. The
That's
Berlin,
amazing.
and
Yeah.
so the concertmaster, what's his name, Deschamps, who's been there forever, and I love him. He's also the leader of the Baroque orchestra. So he knows all that
Yeah.
technique, but then he can play
Yeah.
it old school as well. And it's
Right.
just, I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah.
ability and agility.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's interesting that you bring this up because I have to do Orfeo in
Okay.
January.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
and it's like it's and I love Baroque music, and
Mm-hmm.
and particularly that opera. And so talking with the company first, I said, well, are we using, sorry about that,
No problem.
are we are we using uh you know the modern orchestra? And they said yes, yes, go, we'll, we always do. And then they came over, they said, well, how do you feel, there's a Baroque orchestra, would you like to work
Mm.
with a Baroque orchestra? I said, oh yeah, absolutely. It's a
Oh,
phenomenal opportunity to
fantastic.
ask questions and to
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah.
So that's my adventure. Is
Oh, I think you're going to have a wonderful time.
I can't
Wonderful
wait.
time with the Baroque orchestras I've played with and
Mm.
conducted.
Yeah.
I mean, there's dogma in every world. It
Yeah.
happens in the early
Yeah.
music world. It
Yeah.
happens in the modern world. But there's a curiosity that I just love
Right.
often, and there's strong opinions too. But it's so fun to get in there and go, ooh,
Yeah.
let's try it this way.
Yeah.
Let's try it this way. And
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people discuss different things. So I think
Yeah.
you're going to have a lot of fun. A lot of
Oh,
fun.
I can't wait because like the majority of my repertoire is 1880 on, right? So this this is I said to the general director, we worked together before in Seattle, at the opera. I said, are you okay? Really? Yeah, yeah. She says, yes. I said, okay, okay. I have a lot of learning to do. Thank
That's
goodness I'm
great.
home for a couple of months. Yeah.
Right, right. That's what this time is for. Yeah, for sure. I think we talked about blending. Oh, and by the way, Sandra, thank you for your comment. There, one of our listeners said 4 + 5 = 9. So you can't see the Norrington thing, but 4 and 5 = 9. Thank you, Sandra.
Oh,
That
okay.
was that's perfect. And Christopher, we're going to get to your question. Christopher Wong from Hong Kong is tuning in.
Oh,
Yeah, actually,
hi.
before we get to that, let's get it into his question. He says, given all the history of the ninth, how do you prepare for it? Your mindset, the mindset of the orchestra and the singers, how do you shape that? And if that changes for each concert? Great question, Christopher.
Yeah. Do you want to go
No, you're
first?
the guest. Go for it.
Oh, okay. I, I think I looked at it. If I think if I'm lucky, Oh, please, please. I'm hoping that I will have a few more chances to experience it again.
Mm-hmm.
But that very first time was, I looked at the score, from the, and I played it on, to physically feel what the transitions could be or could not
Mm-hmm.
be, what the chords felt like, um, and and read a lot. Um, I asked a lot of questions, and definitely the text really made this a, a very very different experience than the
Mm-hmm.
usual symphony. Um, and the text really influenced the artistic choices, right, that you would make for that final movement.
Right.
And it's quite interesting that that theme that everybody knows, after you've experienced like the complexity of the first and second and the third and the absolute like trans is so transcendently beautiful, right? And the third movement is so personal, the adagio, like out of nowhere. I mean, these things, they all affect like how the tempo, what happens, how
Mm-hmm.
your singer's going to feel, like, and you're right, every single performance is different.
Right.
You Because how you take that first step, with the first sustained note, it affects like a domino, right? Everything.
Mm-hmm.
And your singers are on stage, they're listening, and I think it also affects them. I not Beethoven night, but I did a Verdi Requiem where the soprano, um, uh, beautiful soprano, lost someone really, really dear to her, like a very close family member. And she told me after, she goes, I could hardly get through. I could hardly get through. And she says, I didn't know how I could have gotten through that performance. And she said, and worse of all, she says, sitting right in front of me was this man who, from the first like five measures, he started to cry, and he didn't stop
Wow.
crying for the entire
Wow.
requiem. And then she said, "Oh my goodness! Like, how am I going to do the last move? The final."
Right.
And, yeah. So all these things affect, right? What happens, the colors,
Mm-hmm.
what we have for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in a way, you can't really prepare. I think you can only prepare like the framework of what it is, right? This is how it goes. This is how it goes. This is and who knows what's going to happen tonight?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
So true. So true. And so many elements, like you say, that are there that you can prepare for to a certain degree, but even the vocal writing is very difficult for the singers. So
Yeah.
there's already an edge that's
Yeah.
almost implied in a way. And all of that, and like you say, you have these three movements, and then the beginning of the fourth where those themes come back. So you get
Mm-hmm.
a glimpse of them from those movements. And do you
Yep.
take the same tempo, and what's going on with those? And then the
Yep.
bass, how are they going to do their first solo of the whole
Exactly.
the recit thing after all
Yeah.
the basses and the cello play it. So there's all these
Oh,
elements that there are so many different options, and those options often not only are decided, but sometimes, dare I say it, decided for you in that moment, just because of the
yeah.
circumstances. Yeah.
Exactly. Like I listened to two recordings where you got to the when the basses and the cello and the double basses played that theme. And there's so many ways you could do it. You could do it like, let's say, like an organ in church. You just, and this is the tune for the hymn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now everybody's saying, you could do it like that, or you could do it with like more motion. You could do it with like a mysticism. You could come out of nowhere. I mean, there's just so many choices, and that's why I think live performance cannot go away, and I hope it will never go away,
Right.
because it's just not the same, right?
Right. Right. It's true. It's true. And we talked earlier about combining different elements and different traditions together. And I have an example of, I think, someone who does a very good job of doing that, and I'm going to show the recording now, and then answer a question by Jennifer Lang that kind of asks the same thing. So Ricardo Chailly, this is one of my recordings that I only recently, actually I knew it when it came out a number of years ago, but I haven't listened to it a lot since for many years. But Chailly, he kind of came to prominence as a very young conductor for the Concertgebouw, and he was known for his new music, a lot of new music and great stuff. But over the years, he's had this way, and especially when he became orchestral director of the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig, of blending kind of an early music approach to modern orchestras. And David Zinman did that in the Tonhalle in Zurich, and all these conductors do this. Yannick does it a lot. Daniel Harding, Simon Rattle, all these conductors do it, and I there's something about this recording that I admire, with the great playing, kind of old school German playing of the Leipzig Orchestra with his new music kind of intensity. Yeah. And so I think he's a great example of combining him. And Jennifer asks, how, which is along this line, how much does the respect for authenticity balance the desire to personalize the performance to set it apart from all others?
Yeah. Well, with regards to the Chailly recording, that's a really good question, because I wonder what he was thinking, because the opening is quite a bit faster. Like, it's almost at 80 or whatever that Beethoven wanted, that even Harnoncourt didn't do. Harnoncourt was only about 50.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that Harnoncourt wanted to, bring the authenticity to his performance, it was Chailly who did the tempo that was closest to what Beethoven wanted. I don't know. That's a very good question. As I think it's very difficult to ask. I think it depends on person to person. And I think sometimes conductors themselves don't know what they've done until they're done the performance, right?
And you can't really do something objectively in music. You can try, and you can try to do, okay, I'm doing this tempo, but even if you had two conductors doing the exact same tempo with the exact same musicians doing the same, articulation, all that, it still will sound different because of the personalities involved. Did you ever read the book by Gunther Schuller? He was the American horn player but composer, and apparently with him and Pierre Boulez, two of the best ears, or I guess four of the best ears in the business. And I worked with him at New England Conservatory, and he was a bit of a hard, am I allowed to say hard person?
Hard. Okay.
Right, a hard bum.
Yes, that's right.
That's right. And he wrote this book outlining different conductors' take on Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and really kind of deriding every conductor that went off of the tempo markings and all of this. And I remember getting so excited about this book. About the third or fourth chapter in, I closed it and said, I cannot read this. And I knew him, and he was brilliant, like a brilliant man. But I think to your point and to Jennifer's question, you can't be objective when you're doing something live. If you and I were talking here, we could have lined up the exact text that we were going to say at what levels and everything, but even then it wouldn't have come out the same each time.
Okay, guilty as charged. This is what I nearly did this afternoon. I updated my GarageBand, and I just did not have enough time to superimpose the 1942 recording and the Lucerne recording, which is like 52.
Yeah.
I was so curious to see how it lined up. Actually, I tried to play it at the same time, and it can't be the same, because I think in 1952, it was not the same time as 1942.
No.
Orchestra different. We were talking about the portamento. I'm sure a few of them just couldn't help it, right? In the
Right.
1940s, it was just like, this could be the last time I play this gorgeous, amazing piece. I can't help myself. There it goes, right?
Yeah.
And 1952, very different um, in ways and
So
in just,
different.
yeah,
And we're talking about context as well. I mean, 52. I
yeah,
mean, in Swiss, you know, in Lucerne as well, Switzerland, you know,
right, yeah,
and Furtwängler is on shaky ground with almost everyone in the world,
yeah, yeah,
because of what he did or didn't do according to, you
yeah,
know, each person.
right, yeah,
And so it's a different context,
yeah.
and I think that that's for every recording, every
Oh yeah.
performance. Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree. Like I sometimes think I will take the four very bad notes, because given that the 42, when there's one moment when the choir, bless them, came in, it was like, whoa, like, that is not the chord. And there was one other moment with the poor clarinet was, playing the leading tone, going, oh, not quite getting there. But who cares?
Who
Like, I don't
cares?
care, because like everything else was so real and so sublime, and he in his way like reflected everything that was going on at that time, all
Exactly.
the fears of his friends, the people in the orchestra, I mean, our people, I mean, everyone all over the world. I mean, it's such a remarkable moment. And
Mm-hmm.
52, here, I think things are, I don't know, a little bit
Yeah.
more relaxed.
Well, yeah, we're lucky to have those testaments to those times. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
And then
Judith,
the other,
what's that?
and I was saying the other two recordings, 91 and so on,
Yeah.
very different as
Very
well.
different, and they're recordings of their times as well, because
That's
of, you know, we do early music has changed so much, and the way that
mhm.
players play is so different than 30 years ago. I
Yeah,
can't believe it's 30 years. My goodness. But yeah, it's each moment is special.
yeah,
Judith, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm so glad we could discuss our recordings and just
yeah.
hang out for half an hour.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I know that there are these figures that were doing this, but I
Yes,
felt like we're dancing and not doing this.
exactly. There's not much of this, and more of what we're doing right now.
Exactly.
And I think I was thinking about this today, where if musicians, no matter what their bent is, when there's a good recording, there's a good recording, and you can find so much brilliance in it. So yeah. Great. Before we sign off, I just want to remind the audience out there that this Thursday we have another Meet the Musicians in Your Neighborhood with our very own Jennifer Lang, who asked that wonderful question. She's the choir director here in town at the university, and works with the symphony a lot. And so it'll be great to have her on. And I wanted to have her perspective on Beethoven 9, and how to prepare the choir, and how to work with an orchestra as well. So that's going to be really fascinating Thursday at 7. But thanks again, Judith,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully we'll see you in person sometime very soon.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.